Welcome back. There's no such thing as a 10-minute break when you have this many people who really want to talk to each other. So gave you 15 minutes, but I don't want you to miss any more minutes with this panel. So thanks for coming back in. My name is Liz City. I teach over at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, which I say with a smile because schools of education were going through the ringer a little bit right there in the last two sessions. But with pride, I teach over at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. I'm a former teacher, principal, and literacy coach, and I now work with education leaders over at the Harvard Ed School, and I run a new initiative we've got collaborating with MIT and Florida State University called Reach Every Reader. So I get the fun job of trying to help us have a conversation for the next hour or so, including with 4 amazing panelists, some of whom you've already heard a little bit from earlier today. So what I want to do is quickly introduce the panel, then we're going to get your voices in the room in a couple of different ways, and then I'm going to ask each of them a question just to get us rolling, and then we'll open it up for your questions, dialogue. We're going to try to have dialogue across the panelists as well as across you. So we'll see how we do. There's already so many ideas in the room, and I know there are lots of discussions to be had. So that is our plan. As you can see in the agenda, this part of the afternoon is to say, what do the people on the front lines actually think about all this stuff? The teachers, the administrators, the people who actually read and learn in different ways, the researchers who study this and really spend a lot of time in classrooms. What do they make of all of this, and how do we think about both the challenges, which is the name of this session, but honestly, I think what you'll find is that if you're in practice, you can't focus on challenges without trying to solve them. That's how you focus on challenges. So you're going to hear a lot of not just what are the problems, which is a really important part of discovering what a solution could be. How you define the problem matters for how you define the solution, but also what are they actually trying to do about it in their own lives. So let me introduce you to the panel. Mika Bardeen, who you already heard a little bit from, currently an 8th grader at the Dwight School in New York. She will be featured on an upcoming episode of Apple TV's Dream, where she plays the part of an elite squash player. This is not going to be much of a stretch for her because she is an elite squash player. She's the top female squash player in the U.S. under the age of 15, and she mentors and Yahoo! Let's applaud for that. Mika mentors and coaches young female squash players in both Harlem and Israel. So please join me in welcoming Mika Bardeen to our panel. Down at the end here, wave your hand, we have Colleen Galvin-Labby. She's a longtime teacher and early childhood education leader in Boston Public Schools. This year, Colleen is supporting teachers and students as an instructional coach in Boston Public Schools' Office of Social and Emotional Learning. People are always surprised to learn, and I certainly was, that she has 2 adult children in their early 20s. Please join me in welcoming Colleen to the panel. Dr. Oneida Foxroy is the Director of English Language Arts and Literacy at Boston Public Schools, where she provides district-wide leadership and support to schools in the development, implementation, and evaluation of K-12 English language and literacy curricula. Oneida was born in Cuba and named for a character on an Arabic soap opera on television shown there. I love these fun facts. All right, I'll tell you a fun fact about me at the end, just so we're all even. All right, please join me in welcoming Oneida to the panel. And finally, you already had a chance to meet our panelist and his alter ego. Dr. Sean Robinson is a senior research associate in the University of Wisconsin-Madison's Equity and Inclusion Laboratory, where he is creating new pathways to removing literacy-related barriers. For fun, Sean enjoys going on 100-mile bike rides. Isn't that what you all do for fun? All right, please join me in welcoming Sean to the panel. I'll add my little fun fact, which is that when I was a teacher and principal in North Carolina, I drove a school bus to help my students get around. And I can say you're all glad you were not on the road while I was driving a school bus in Durham, North Carolina. Okay, so get out those smartphones. Some of you have already done this with the Poll Everywhere panel. We're going to get your voices in the room first electronically, and then I'll get your actual voices in the room before we start with the panel. So here's the question. What percentage of students who cannot read proficiently by the end of the 4th grade will end up in jail or on welfare? This is like a what do you think, but there's a right answer kind of a question. Do you think it's 22%, 50%, 66%, or 80%? So this is just another way of asking, what are the consequences? You can't read proficiently by the end of 4th grade. What are the likely consequences? All right, I'm going to give you about 20 more seconds to weigh in here.
It's funny because I should know it, but it's either 66 or 80.
Okay, the answer is 66%. It's about 43% of you were on that one. Some of you thought it was even worse at 80%, but at 66%. So pretty incredible consequences if you can't read proficiently by the end of 4th grade. Potential consequences. All right, so that's question number 1. Now that was just like you put a letter in, but now you got to turn your brain on because we want you to actually type something in. All right, so second question. What are the greatest, we'll get it up here in a second, you can think about it. What are the greatest misconceptions about students who struggle to read? What are the greatest misconceptions about students who struggle to read? It'll be up there in a minute. You can think about it. Greatest misconceptions about students who struggle to read. There you go. You can see it's coming up as a word cloud, so the bigger the word, the more frequent the answer. All right, so while you are reading that, some of you might have a little trouble seeing it. Perfect. Okay. While you're doing that, now we're soon going to have the panel get their voices in the room. But before we do that, I know some of you are doing this at break, but I would love to just get your actual voices a little more in the room before we get the panel's voices in the room. I want you to make sure, first of all, you've met everybody at your table. People came in at different times, so just make sure you introduce yourself and tell them one fun fact, and it has to be really short because I'm giving you 2 minutes for this. So just name and a fun fact, since you learned a fun fact about the panel. All right? Name and fun fact, and then we're going to open it up to the panel here. Sean said I should do that last time when I was raising my hand. All right, thanks for the tip, Sean. Okay, so let's dive into the panel. And we're going to start with Mika, in part because I always think that if you really want to know what's happening in schools, you should ask the students. So we're going to start with the most important people in the room. We're going to start with the students. So Mika, you're an excellent student and the country's top squash player in your age group. How have you been able to overcome difficulties with dyslexia? And what advice do you have for other students in your shoes and for all these people in the room who want to help students in your shoes?
I think I've been able to cope with my dyslexia by listening to other people's strategies for reading and writing and trying them out for myself, but also having the understanding while I'm doing it that the strategies that might work for them might not work for me, and being able to understand that, and I think that works for others. And if I were to tell a student in my shoes, I would probably just tell them to keep it up. And I know it's unfair how much harder we have to work than everyone else, but in turn it makes you a better, smarter, and more resilient person.
All right, thank you for that. That's good advice for your fellow students. Now, what about advice for the people in this room and other people like them, the teachers, the researchers, the administrators, who really do want to help students with dyslexia or other reading difficulties succeed? What advice would you have for them?
I think it's important to keep in mind that test scores don't define me and my intellect, and I think that works for a lot of the other students and goes in place for that as well. And that I find it interesting that I'm qualified to speak here at a board at MIT at the age of 14 from my experience with dyslexia. but would I be accepted here as a student if all they had were my SAT and ACT scores? And is this how we should be defining kids' futures? And is this fair for dyslexic students?
All right. Thank you very much, Mika. All right, and meanwhile, you're thinking about the questions and topics you want to talk with the panelists about and also talk with each other about, okay? So keep that in mind as they're prompting questions for you. Okay, Colleen, you've been an educator for many years. How and where are teachers' learning strategies? We just heard a lot about that from our two panelists, that they're not learning strategies.
Or the wrong ones.
Or the wrong ones. But in your experience, how and where are teachers learning strategies to support struggling readers? That's part one. Let's talk about that one, and then I'll give you part two of the question after that.
Okay. First of all, thank you for inviting me here. It's an honor to be here, sitting up here with these panelists. So everything I wrote down, I'm not going to say, because now my brain is spinning, because it's very complicated. So to just answer this question, there are many, many opportunities for teachers to engage in learning on how to support a diverse group of learners. We have professional development, both mandatory and then, professional development that educators seek out for themselves to become more effective teachers. We're in Boston. We have amazing educational programs that teachers can sign up for. I also went to school for 10 years in a row because I kept wanting to learn more, because I was inspired by my students on a daily basis and didn't feel that I was doing an adequate enough job. So continue to learn, which I continue to do as well. Specifically for access to programs that teach educators learning strategies or the correct learning strategies to support struggling readers, we need more of those. We have specialized programs. I was a part of the Literacy Collaborative through Lesley University. We have reading recovery. One can be trained in Wilson, Orton Gillingham, but these also cost money. They are not mandatory. So we need more. As simple as that.
All right, in part B,
Yep.
we heard a lot from our keynote speakers about the divide between research and practice. And so in your experience, or just as you're sitting listening to that and reflecting on your own experience, how can we build better bridges between teachers in the classrooms and scientists studying childhood brains?
Again, very complicated. I think this is amazing. And I think more of this has to happen, more conversations and more partnering with one another. There are experts in every building. I work with some amazing teachers that perhaps don't have access to all of the things that the scientists are researching and learning along the way. Much of what, and I'm sorry, Liz, but we have to do a better job in educator prep programs. I'm a former new teacher developer and new teacher mentor for the Boston Public Schools. And many of the pre-service and new teachers are not prepared as we should be. I think, again, access to what the scientists are learning along the way and opportunities for us to engage in that learning is what we need. And it is difficult, but I think we can do better.
All right, we definitely can do better. All right.
ES can say dyslexia. It's not a death sentence. That's what you can stop with.
All right.
Dyslexia. That's all you have to do.
Okay, so we have some ideas from the audience already. And I love that there's heat in the room, I just want to say. Because where there's heat, there's light and learning. And this is not easy work, right? We're talking about deeply entrenched patterns, belief systems, and to actually mobilize to make sure all kids have the opportunity to read and succeed, we have to be willing to disagree with each other and work it out in a way that's going to serve kids well. So I think it's great. We're going to have more of that coming right up. All right, so, and that means that includes implicating me. Go for it. You don't have to apologize for implicating me. We just graduated last week, 720 people over at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and I have been running a doctoral program in education leadership there, and I said to my graduates, one of my leadership lessons that I've learned and that I hope you take with you is, yes, you are sometimes part of the problem. It can be hard to admit that. The good part about that is it also means you can be part of the solution, because if you're part of the problem, you can be part of the solution. So there's no problem with being part of the problem, because it gives you agency on being part of the solution. So implicate me all you want. All right, Oneida. Director of K-12 English Language Arts and Literacy for the Boston Public Schools. You already have a suggestion about what BPS can do differently. But what I want you to first talk about is you're charged with a pretty big task, which is designing, implementing, and evaluating English language and literacy curricula for more than 1,000 classrooms across 125 schools. So what do you see as the biggest challenges in organizing to support diverse readers at scale, and how do you support teachers and parents?
So I want to thank you for having me. I, like Colleen, didn't change everything that I was planning on sharing, but altered a couple of things that I was planning on sharing. I think that, so I am a parent first, educator by profession second. And so when I am thinking about diverse readers and writers in the Boston Public Schools, I'm always thinking from a parent lens. So I have a child who's a high flyer. That's what I call my oldest son. And then I have a child who is a high flyer but had some disabilities that were identified. And that changed how I see and how I saw instruction and supports for him. And so I am a huge advocate for not one size fits all. So we do multiple things in the Boston Public Schools to reach students. I am someone who, in listening to Mark Seidenberg, agreed with almost everything that he had to say about the research. And so one of the biggest struggles that I have in the Boston Public Schools is trying to share that research with teachers, trying to get our teachers to think about what is the cognitive science saying about how do we effectively teach reading, how do we effectively teach writing, what are the practices that make the most sense for all of our children. And so I spend a lot of time really being mindful of that in that space. I think that a lot of so some of the comments that Micah made to Mark, Mika, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
Some of the comments that Mika made to Mark, I think resonate, but not just from a dyslexic point of view, but they also resonate from an ethnic point of view, from a racial point of view. So these tests are a significant barrier to many of our children. And so one of the things that I spent a lot of time thinking about and struggling with is how do we get our parents, our educators, to do writ large work around the needs of all the children. So it's not just the children with an identified issue that need advocacy. We need advocacy for all of our children. So in supporting teachers, I want to make sure that we do that for all students. One of the things that Natalie mentioned that was going to be heavy on my list is this idea about evidence-based. So I don't want anything in the Boston Public Schools that doesn't come with evidence-based. Now, she put that up there as something that we don't want to lead with. Well, I lead with that always. I have to have a space where we're always looking for kids' outcomes. And so that's one of the spaces that I heavily focus on. And so I look for evidence-based, but I'm also someone, like Natalie mentioned in her presentation, that believes that many of the children that are served in Boston and many of the children that are served in general bring assets to classrooms and to instruction. And I want those to be part of what our tools and curricula are that we use as a district. So I'm huge on background knowledge building. I'm also huge on just this asset-based instruction. Then I just think that there are struggles that both mentioned, Wexler and Seidenberg, around the struggles we have when we become ideologically connected to something we're really used to doing and doing that we feel we do well. And so some of those struggles have to do with shifting practice and being able to let outcomes be our measure as opposed to our emotional attachment to a practice or a routine that we are really committed to. So those are some of the pieces that I think about quite a bit when I am trying to design professional development or trying to design instruction or select curriculum materials. Those are all the pieces that I try to put into place.
Okay, thank you. And Sean, your research has looked closely at the relationship between race, literacy, and the profound achievement gaps that we still see in this country. What do you believe are the most effective ways for preventing many young children from slipping through the cracks in our education system and putting them on pathways to success?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity for being here this morning. The work that I do really stems around social justice for all students. Every student with dyslexia. I'm a proud advocate, say the word. I'm unapologetic for advocating for kids with dyslexia. Preventive interventions to ensure academic success, that kids are on the right track, early identification. There are issues within certain school districts where students are not properly being identified and they're getting labeled with behavioral or other identifications that take them on a different pathway, and that really sets them up for failure. It doesn't give them opportunity to learn academic skills that they need to be successful. So that's one thing. I think also a lack of shared information. I do live in Wisconsin, and it's a whole language state. Everything is reading recovery, and it's not helping the kids at all. It's killing the kids, every kid. And I believe that the information that we do have from researchers like Dr. Seidenberg and others, teachers they're not informed about it, and there's a lot of resistance. I think there's myths too and barriers that prevent students from being successful. I also think that training, particularly around culturally responsive pedagogy, is necessary. So there's a lot of things that are necessary to help all kids get on the right track. But for me, when I talk about African American boys who are identified 2 to 3 more times as being behavioral at risk, there's things that need to be changed within the system that I think most educators would agree. And there's also a lot of politics that keep kids from growing and learning, which is just unethical. You know, we're funding failure in Wisconsin. So.
Okay, we don't want to fund failure. So what I want you to do at your table is, before I open it up for you to ask any questions you want of the panelists, is to just talk with a neighbor or two about the question or comment, if it's not framed as a question yet, that's most on your mind right now, all right? Because we're not going to have a chance to get all of them, all those questions for the panel, but I would like them to all get in the room, at least with your colleagues. So the question or comment that's most on your mind right now, I'll give you a couple minutes on that, and then we'll open it up for you to...
Can I just say one thing to everyone? I'm sorry, pretend I'm sitting at all your tables. I gotta say, if I can ask everyone here to no longer talk about dyslexia as a disability. You have one son, you're high flyer, and your other with a disability.
No, but I said he was
Dyslexia
also
is not
a high flyer.
I understand, but you said with a disability. That was your word. I'm asking
You're
everyone
right.
here not to categorize
Okay.
dyslexia as a disability. It is not. And if you want evidence-based, look at my kid.
Right.
I'm done. Thank you. Now talk amongst yourselves.
All right.
Now, I want
So
you to know.
language requests
he is
now.
not dyslexic.
We got the comment most
So
on
my
her
son has
mind.
a
Let's get the
language
question or comments most on your mind out into the room. That's good. Welcome, welcome.
No worries. I'm just grabbing this
All
real
right.
quick.
Okay. All right, let's bring it back up here. I know. Sean's telling me I got to clap again. If you can hear me, clap 3 times. Okay. So we have this panel. We have about 25 minutes. I have backup questions. I have poll everywhere slides. We can do all that if we need to. But at first I want to hear what's on your mind. All right, so my job is to moderate this panel, which does not mean my job is to bring the heat down in the room, but my job is to help us hold any heat we've got and to try to learn from the panelists we have. All right, so first question, go ahead.
My question is for Mika. How would you design the college admission process so it would be fair to people?
Honestly, as an 8th grader, I mean, I'd add some ice cream in there. Like, I'd make it fun. I don't really think that, I know what I don't think. I don't know what I do think in terms of tests because I haven't done so many tests and different types of tests in my life. All I know is that the way it's done now, studying for 4 years, knowing that someone that isn't right brain dominant is going to do better than me at this test, and me being completely based off of a test, just one test that I've done, I know that is not where our technology, our minds are really at nowadays. And I think that what the colleges are really looking for nowadays isn't just how well someone can memorize information and write it back down with hard, tricky questions. I think they're looking for people that can really speak their mind about bigger topics to actually make a change in the world. So I think something based off of that.
All right, thanks, Mika. Do you have a follow-up question to that?
I think more and more colleges.
Wait, hold on just 1 second for the microphone. So right up, Steve, right up here, Laureen. I just want to make sure everybody can hear your follow-up.
I don't know what the percentage is, but I believe more and more private colleges don't really need the SAT or the ACT. So your interview and what you've done and how creatively you've approached each subject is what they look for. And then what you can retain in terms of long-term memory and how well you can then retell. And I think, you know, in these 3D interactive, wonderful interviews that I've seen at the college level, which takes a lot more work on part of, you know, the guidance counselors and the interviewers, that's where we have to train them to see the beauty and the intelligence of kids that have any reading problem.
Well, I wouldn't call it a problem.
What a reading difference or a reading, you know.
I'm going to tell you the reason why I don't think it should be called a problem, because it's just different. If you call everything a problem that is different, then everyone in this world is a problem. Everyone in this world is different. And for calling out different and saying that it's a problem, that's the biggest mistake that we make as a society, because this does not just start as dyslexia. This goes out through everything, from the way you look, from the way you act. Everyone is different, and that's something that we need to acknowledge and respect instead of saying that it's a problem.
All right, thanks, Mika. And one of the things we know is that schools are not very well set up for difference. Yeah. So we got lots of microphones in here. All right, let's keep trying to build the conversation as we go. Go ahead. You're on.
Am I allowed to ask?
You are. Go for it.
Getting a little disturbed by some of the directions of the discussion here. I think one thing that's missing is how variable kids are who struggle with reading. Also, their circumstances vary a great deal. So one thing we think about is dyslexia as being a risk factor, a condition that doesn't dictate an outcome, but it puts the child at risk for a reading problem. Whether they actually have those problems depends on other factors, such as education level in the family, access to high prestige elite schools, or other kinds of educational interventions, race, poverty, intelligence, other kinds of skills, and so on, personality and tenacity and other things like that. I think we need to recognize that there's a very broad spectrum of kids who struggle with reading, and that the factors that actually determine outcome are multiple, and they are all dimensional, which means they vary in degree. So I don't like calling it a disability. I like calling it a risk factor that interacts with other things. But I also don't like calling it a gift for the same reason, because for many kids, it is not a gift. It is actually a very difficult situation. It's something that doesn't get recognized. They don't have access to the right sorts of interventions or people, and it actually puts them on a path that is not good. So I think we need to recognize the whole range of experiences that kids have. It is important not to take test scores as simply the be-all and end-all measure of a person's worth, and I think everyone can agree on that. If test scores are being used to hold people back, then that is a bad thing. But I also think that there are other people who have other experiences who aren't represented here. And for them, dyslexia is not a gift. And it is actually something that more likely is overlooked, isn't dealt with until it's too late, and is a contributing factor to other sorts of life events that are really not positive. What we need to be thinking about is helping everybody.
All right, I'm gonna let Sean jump in next. I'm going to let Sean jump in next, and then Mika, okay?
So I'm just going to be transparent. I agree, I disagree with Dr. Seidenberg. So when I talk about children who have gifts or children who are gifted, I'm looking at what they're capable of doing, just not within the context of school, but outside of school too. Sports, arts, things that make them feel good about themselves, allow them to see themselves as being successful and accomplished. I'm not looking at the IQs, I'm looking at how they see themselves as being successful. And when I worked in the prison system, there were a lot of individuals in the state of Wisconsin who had dyslexia, that were completely illiterate, they couldn't read, and it was the fact that they came from environments where they weren't exposed to early identification, proper teacher training, or resources, and they were frustrated. Angry, frustrated, and a lot of the things that led to the decisions to end up incarcerated was their anger from not knowing how to read. And so, in that sense, I wouldn't say they might have been gifted in other areas of their life that they might not have been known. You know, a lot of them count money. They can play dice quick. They're good with numbers. You tell them how much a gram is or drugs, the numbers really quick. But when it came to reading, they just struggled, they were angry, they were frustrated. And so I guess, again, for myself, the work I do when I talk about giftedness, I'm talking about the whole student, their family, the things that they can do to feel good about themselves. Because sometimes when you have them read, they feel frustrated. So I think we can have a debate about definitions, but I just wanted to put that out there that, I look at every kid as being gifted. I don't care where you come from. So, it's just about having the opportunities presented in front of you so you can, level the playing field so you could be the next doctor, lawyer, CEO, chief of police. So, I just wanted to put it out there.
All right, thank you, Sean. All right, Mika.
As much as I love having an older man tell me what I can and can't do, or say, I'm going to have to, I have a question for you now, if that's all right. why do you know so much about dyslexia? Like, what is your correlation with dyslexia? Do you have it? Do you know someone? Do you study it? Like, I just. Yeah, I do. You have it?
No, I'm going to answer your question, okay? So just give me a second. And I really don't like having to argue with you because the main points that you're making are ones I agree with. For example, I was trying to point out before how tests systematically, standardized language and reading tests that are used in schools all over this country don't accurately reflect the capabilities of large numbers of kids. In particular, I was talking about African American kids, but the point generalizes to many other kids. I think what set you off was when I started to cite the data from things like the NAEP, which show that less than half the kids scored a proficient or above level. And what you're saying to me is, well, there's people like you who actually would have scored poorly on that who are actually being undervalued, under-assessed. And I agree with that totally. However, it doesn't change the picture that comes out of those data. Those data are still a useful index of how, on a massive level, we're doing and where we need to be doing better. The problem I have is not in listening to the people who are most affected, or indeed having judgments about their future being made by the affected people. So for example, in the research I've done on African American English and dialect, it's not up to me to tell people what to do. I can try to provide information. And I can work with people who can communicate to the relevant parties and are embedded in the relevant communities, and I can help. But I'm not telling anybody what to do. The problem with calling dyslexia a gift is that, first of all, there are a number of people who are hucksters who call it a gift, and they're basically selling a story that has no research basis. The second thing is, if you call it a gift, it is for some people, but you're overgeneralizing to the broad population. If you call it a gift, and the kid does not become Henry Winkler, or he does not become Tom Cruise, or he does not become some other famous person who claims they were dyslexic and overcame it, then that is blaming the kid. Because indeed, they had dyslexia, and that was a gift. So why aren't they Silicon Valley billionaires? I'm trying to take the broad perspective that incorporates your experience and situated in a much kind of a bigger spectrum. And I certainly don't want to tell you anything about what you should be doing. I think that other people should have the opportunities that you had.
Thank you for explaining that to me.
Okay, so a couple things I want to point out, and I hope as you're listening, you're thinking about what's the language we use? How does it matter what language we use, right? Because what language we use shapes how we think about what the problem is, what the solutions are, about the capacities of the people that we're talking about, right? What the possibilities are. So language matters a lot, and that's why we're having an argument about it, because language matters a lot. We're also talking about the difference between individual experience and large groups of people's experience, right? And we know within any large group of people, there's enormous variation. And part, I think, of what we're trying to kind of argue a little bit about here, and that all the people in this room in different ways are working on, is how do you honor the individual's needs and serve the individual while also recognizing what the patterns are across groups and use that to help you make decisions that you can work at something at scale. So that tension is live, I think, in the room, which is all good tension, I think. All right, so we have some more questions or comments. Let's take one back there behind the pillar that I can't see, the person with a microphone, and then we'll come right up here.
Thank you. I'll stand here so I can see most of you. I just wanted to bring the parents into the conversation and ask all of you who want to comment on it, how we can encourage parents to be part of the solution. And I see that as a few different things. One is, helping their children at home to prepare and learn to read. One is to help identify if they're struggling early and they need to bring it to the attention of the school, how to work with the school to advocate for their child's needs, and then possibly maybe even be part of the bridge between the science and the practice? You know, how can parents learn about the science and advocate in the school? So just any of those things, what can we help parents to understand, to be involved? Thanks.
All right, who wants to take that up here?
I actually just I edited a book that just came out. It's with Peter Lang Publishing Company, and it's voices of mothers with children with dyslexia all over the world. And parents, particularly mothers, are sharing their experiences, how they have navigated the K-12 system, both here and internationally, to provide services for their sons or daughters with dyslexia. I have 2 boys. I doubt they'll have dyslexia, but I don't know. They've shown signs of progress farther than I did when I was young. They're spelling, reading at a fast rate. So I haven't had that experience yet, but I've had experience of reading the stories from the mothers around the world, and it was a very powerful story of how they navigate the system, utilize resources to provide what their kids need, and it's pretty much voices of mothers with children with dyslexia, and it's a powerful book of mothers, and I commend all the moms in here. I came from a single parent household. My mother, she was a fighter, so all the mothers in here, you know, I want to just give you a round of applause because you are
Some moms in here.
mothers are the champions. I'm not discounting fathers, but you know, mothers are the champions behind and their kids. So I imagine there's some stories in here. Parents can probably share, mothers too, and the panelists here, you know, that could probably speak more than to what I can speak of.
Sean, was there anything in your book, in listening to all those stories, were there any elements that were particularly common across all those? Yeah, can you give us a couple things?
Well, one was lack of resources, services, particularly Orton Gillingham. The other one was fighting the school system, which most parents, and then financial too, how much it costs to get tutored or even a diagnostic assessment. So that was across the board, both here and even in Africa. That was themes that were across.
All right, school system folks, we're going to put you on the hot spot a little bit. All right, so common theme is struggle fighting the school system to get the child what they need. But we have this question about what recommendations would you give parents?
As a teacher for a minute, yeah.
All right, Colleen's ready.
Sure.
Yep, Colleen.
So as a classroom teacher, my job is to partner with the parents and the families. Sometimes it's one parent, sometimes it's a guardian. Whoever the adult is at home that is in charge of the child, my job is to partner with that person and to listen to that person. In order for me to best support all of my learners, many of whom do not speak English as a first language, I need to learn everything there is to know about them in order to figure out their needs, not just based on both formal and informal assessments in school, but where does the child live? How do they get to school? Who else lives in the home? Has there been any traumatic experiences that anybody knows about? All of these things impact learning. So I always start the year in the summertime by inviting parents to my classroom. And we sit down and we have a one-on-one conversation. And that's how I begin to build the relationships with the parents. If I need an interpreter, then that takes some more planning on my part. I've also done home visits. So when parents are not able to come to me, I go to them. And I try to build that relationship throughout the year in different ways, whether it's sending home resources, whether it's inviting parents in, for some of the learning activities that happen, throughout the year. My classroom's always has an open door. Everybody is invited in, especially the parents and family members. And I think also, along with the listening, it is my job to help the parent advocate for their child if there isn't, something that comes up that myself or the school is not doing an effective job. My job is not to be defensive, it's to say, how can I help you? And then consult with my team and make sure that we're doing everything we can to support the child.
You want to add anything, Oneida, before I keep
Just that as So while I agree with everything that Colleen just said, as a person of color, there's also the space that I have to live in as both a parent and an educator with overdiagnosing and over-evaluating children, and a caution to that. At the same time, I also want supports to be provided as preventative as opposed to interventions, which means that we waited till after a child failed. And so there's a horrible balance that has to be played in keeping both pieces in space. And I think that one of the things that as a parent of a child with you said, Dr. Seidberg, risk factor. So my child is not dyslexic. My child had a speech and language, and at that time, it was diagnosed as a disability. I can be more politically correct and call it a risk factor. I had to arm myself first with a lot of knowledge about what that meant and what the implications of having a child with a speech and language risk factor meant. And then from that space, then I could advocate for what was in his best interest. But as a person of color, it also means being really mindful because both my children, my sons, are high flyers. So my high flyer that didn't have any diagnosis, I had to advocate for him because they were always trying to diagnose him because of the way he looked and because of who he was. So I was an advocate in that end of trying to quash the identification of some unknown disability because he was a boy of color. And then on the other one, I needed to advocate in the opposite direction because I wanted him to get the services as early as possible because I know the Hart and Risley study, I know all the research around language-based issues and what happens to children when they then enter spaces in terms of reading and writing. And so those are things that I also think are important for us to be mindful of, for parents, that there could be many issues at play for them as they try to advocate.
Okay, I think we have one right here.
Yeah, I could be a little long.
Well, I'll just tell you now before you get started, we only have 5 total minutes left, so if you can keep it short, you'll have more of an opportunity to hear back from the panel.
I'll try.
Okay.
I am mother of a bright dyslexic child that has many talents, okay? Children, all of us have individual talents. The gift part, there is tests for giftedness, okay? So I like to think of them as talents. She also has weaknesses. I have been in the public school experience, and I have also had to make the decision to move her with our own resources because the district refuses to work with parents to a private specialty school that costs $50,000 a year when she's entitled to a free and appropriate public education. Every child, each and every child is entitled to that, okay? So when we talk about variables, if we all learn differently, then why are we using packaged products instead of processes to teach our children? Number one, the whole wait to fail model, the funding, you talk about funding from government, local, federal, state, should be funding processes, should be funding teacher training. Teachers they do not have the knowledge. Most moms in this room could go and have a discussion about Orton Gillingham or structured literacy with the majority of teachers in this room. Maybe, I'm gonna assume that we probably know more, but yet I don't have an education degree. So I'm very confused about why we teach our children with these packaged products versus processes. So my daughter goes to the Carroll School. It's an Orton Gillingham school. When she was in public school, she was crying, screaming, frustrated. She didn't want to go to school because her belly hurt. One day visit shadowing at Carroll School, And she got in the car and said, "Mom, I never want to go back there." Where do you think back there is? Her public school. Why is that? Because they don't understand the way her brain learns, nor do these packaged products. They try to cover the masses, the universe. Okay, well, if you're gonna cover the universe, use a process. Use a process that we can all understand. That's what structured literacy is. That's what Orton Gillingham is. So I'm trying to understand why public schools don't use a process to teach our children, and why, when I walk in an IEP team meeting, that the only opinion that counts is the special ed directors. Not my daughter's neuropsychologist. Not even me. Not even my daughter. And the poor teacher who knows my daughter best, besides me, who knows her best at school, they're pretty much told to keep quiet, or they'll risk losing their job, because the district doesn't do what Dr. Forcelli recommends. Okay? Maybe the district doesn't have the resources. Maybe the district doesn't have the training or the highly skilled personnel to deliver what each child needs.
All right, so time is actually up for the panel, but I don't want to leave. Well, that's a big question with a deeply rooted answer. But I mean, there's a bunch of answers about why that happens the way it does. Actually, there's a.
But years ago in Boston, Orton Gillingham was used. I've met a lot of teachers.
They still,
Yeah.
it's still being used.
And it's still, I mean,
It is being
I don't mean
used.
to bash BPS. It didn't.
It's okay,
I
we can
tried.
take it.
Like,
It's a personal
I quit-
experience.
Right, it's your
Well, no,
experience.
not, because in my little neighborhood right now, a very tiny neighborhood.
Yeah.
We have 52 dyslexic children.
Right.
But these parents are looking
Right.
for answers.
Right.
They're all in BPS, they have private tutors, they're paying $100 an hour for a tutor. They are all working. We are losing our inner cities.
Right.
We're not helping our
Right.
children.
All right. So this is the conversation that it starts to happen during break. You know how that happens? Like, it means you've had a good panel, which is that you've just started the conversation, you haven't finished it. So we'll leave that question for all of us to live and take seriously. And whoa, before the panel leaves, please join me in thanking our panelists, Sean, Mika, Oneida, and Colleen. Now, I know you think it's time for a break, but that's not how the program goes. So we have the opportunity to learn very quickly, lightning speed, from a couple of people who are about to be introduced. So please give them your attention, and then we get a break. As we're leaving, please join me again in thanking the panelists, and we'll get the next group up here.